Hi, my name is Ken Schwartz of Precise Sharpening, and today, excuse me for a second, today I'm going to be preparing a dish called Dhansak Masala, and it's an Indian dish from the Parsi community, and it involves dissecting a leg of lamb. And that's going to be the first part of this dish preparation, and I'll probably do some of the rest of it later. Anyhow, I just want to go over a couple of the knives. This is a knife that I had made at the Bark River Grind-In, and let me go over the shape of it a little bit. But first, let me compare this to a classical Japanese shape called a Hankotsu. And when you compare the two, you can see that the handle is somewhat bigger, which I found a little more comfortable for an American-sized hand. You have a slight curvature to the front, and you have a sort of tanto type point on there. The reasons for this, and you also don't have a big area around here so that the whole knife can slip through more easily. Similarly here, the same thing. Both of these knives have a convex grind on the surface so that the whole blade curves towards the edge, and a flat grind on the back. So you can see the similarities between the two. After the first part of this dissection involves basically just taking the meat off the bone and cubing it up as chunks of meat to use in a stew, which is the Dhansak Masala. I'll probably, just because I like to do it, after I get the meat off the bone and do the initial dissection, cube it up with a Moritaka cleaver, which, as you can see, is a thin cleaver, and will go through the beef quite nicely. Lamb. So, without further ado, let me take this out of its sleeve. And we'll begin the initial dissection. So what I want to do first is go through the joints, and the first joint is right here in the area, so I'm going to go right through this spot to begin the dissection of this joint. So let's go here, and you'll see some of the advantages of a nice thick heavy knife, and go around the joint. And you can see now it's immediately freed that joint up. So now that we have exposed the joint, this heavy tip will work quite nicely to go in and easily spread that joint quite a quick dissection. Alright, now this one is a little more involved. So this is one end of the femur, there's a chunk of the hip. You can see the base of the spine through here, also the hip over here. So what we want to go for is this area right in here. I will also take off a little of the extra fat or skin, and this is another place where this knife is shaped in such a way that it's very good for removing some of this. It's not quite silver skin. And I don't want to remove all of the fat because you do want to have some of the fat in there just to provide some flavor, but not an excessive amount of fat. And again, the shape of the knife very nicely lends itself to not digging in deeply into the meat. We can do some more of this later. It's not critical that we get it all off by any means. Let's keep this out. And you can see that the joint is right about here. So we're going to cut into the meat, and this further frees up the joint. And what we'll do is take some of the meat off of the bone at this point to both further expose the joint and get the meat ready to start dicing up into individual cubes. Again, we're not really going for a very detailed anatomical type dissection. You'll notice too how closely this cuts to the bone, right along the bone, leaving very little meat. Goes right down to this membrane that you see right on a bone called a periosteum. You see how easily it exposes the bone? So now we can easily see where the joint is. And again, this nice heavy tip lets you get right into the joint capsule. Right there, popped it right open. A very quick dissection. Takes the meat off very easily, very quickly. This will just go right in the pot as part of the stewing. You can take a little more of the meat off around the hip area. Take this little extra bit of fat off over here while we're at it. And so just for general deboning type activities, this knife works very well. It's also not a delicate knife, but yet a sharp knife. And it's not the classical traditional style of knife in the sense that the back bevel or the back side of the knife over here is flat rather than concave, like you see with the Yanagis and Usubas and so forth. And again, this allows me to get this whole leg into a stew pot, where it eventually goes. And we got a few little more odds and ends off of the bone. This is more or less of a scraping type motion, just to get some of the extra meat right off of the pelvis area. Okay, well that's cut this piece of fat. Again, it's a nice heavy tip, so I don't have to worry about breaking tips off. And that's a pretty clean dissection. A little bit of meat on the back side here we can still get off. Okay. So now let's go ahead and take some of this off as well. Cut through that tendon. So we'll cut tendons near this end, and again take advantage of the flat side of this knife to strip the meat off the bone. And we'll put this in the stew pot as well. So at this point, you can still trim some of the excess fat off, and in general, it's not a terrible thing to use your hands as well, because that naturally gets into the tissue planes very easily in between the fat. Okay, so let's dice this up into fairly uniform cubes. Still want to get a little more fat off of this. This makes for a slightly leaner dish, but again, don't want to completely dissect all of the fat off. And you can see with a slicing type motion, we're basically separating the fat from the underlying fascia, or as chefs call it, silver skin. Okay, let's dice this up a little bit into portions for the stew meat, and we'll switch knives, but again, does an excellent job, comfortable hand. This is also used for hanging style butchery, where you have the carcass hanging and you grab it like this, put the thumb over it, and come down and pull. So it's sort of a push slice type cut coming down. Okay, let me put this aside for a moment, and we'll start dicing it up with this Moritaka cleaver. So I want fairly large chunks, and as I go, I will take out some of the fat and fascia just to make the pieces more tender and fairly uniform. It's a, you know, the dish itself is a very rustic dish. The pieces of meat are going to be more or less bite-sized. And as we go, I'll remove some of this from the cutting board. As you feel some of it, you'll find just chunks that you really want to leave out. And while I'm doing some of this cutting, I'm going to talk a little bit about the recipe itself. It involves making a masala, or a spice blend, and every masala is a little bit different. So the Dhansak Masala is a masala from the Parsi community, which is a community that migrated from Persia to India, primarily in the Bombay, or now it's currently called Mumbai area. And so each grandmother makes their own sort of different version of the masala. It's basically a blend, like most masalas, that contains some turmeric, cumin, etc. And more traditionally, it is ground rather than chopped up. More modern version, people use a blender, but the more traditional, and one that I like better, takes the spices, including chilies and so forth, and grinds them on a granite slab, which has a roughened surface called a silpata. This produces a better flavor and texture, and crushes rather than slices. So it's the exact opposite of what you would expect to see with a sharp knife. So there are times when you actually don't want sharpness, but want a crush effect. You see this somewhat similarly with different means of preparing salsas, for instance. So the dry spice rub, not too dissimilar in style to barbecue, or American type barbecues where you have rubs. In this instance, what you do is you take garlic. There's a lot of garlic in this dish, and you finely dice the garlic. You very thinly slice some onions, and you cook down the spice mix with ginger, garlic, a number of the spices, the Dhansak Masala, all mixed in. And you put that in the center of a pan. I prefer a cast iron pan. And then after you put the spices in the center and your finely diced onions, and I emphasize it on this dish, you really do want some finely diced onions, because they sort of melt into the dish when they're finely diced. And so you turn this into a bit of a paste, and you cook it in the center of the pan with the onions, and then add some water. And just as you, and this is a technique that I believe was borrowed from the Mughal or Muslim cuisine, called, and I believe I'm pronouncing it right, called buono, where what you do is you cook down the spice mixture, which is like a paste, right to the point where it's just about ready to burn. And then you add water. And then you do it again and again. So you do 3 cycles of this. And what this does is it succeeds in breaking down the